Well, good evening. Is this on? Yeah, okay. He is here, and we are ready to roll. What a special night this is going to be. I've been standing up here or in a place like up here for 8 years introducing speakers to Cap Times Idea Fest. And tonight for Mayor Brandon Johnson and Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, I think this will be our biggest audience ever. And thank you for being part of it. I'd like to thank every one of you, not only for being here, but also for supporting the Capital Times, which your presence does tonight. The Cap Times has served Madison and Wisconsin for more than a century with news and progressive opinion, and for more than a half a century through the Evu Foundation, our philanthropic arm, which is, of course, named for our founder, William T. Evu. And I was thinking how much William T. Evu, who loved this city, would love to be here for an event like this tonight. Thank you. If you're not already a Cap Times member, I invite you to consider becoming one. You can learn more at captimes.com. I want to get this note out to you tonight. Our host, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, is committed to freedom of speech, and freedom of expression is an essential part of the education mission. It's our expectation that you allow the speaker's presentation to occur without disruption. Any disruptions to the event will be handled swiftly by security. Okay, on to our first session of the evening. John Nichols is Associate Editor of the Cap Times and probably needs very little introduction to this crowd. He's been central to the success of Idea Fest since the beginning and has been inviting and interviewing some leading progressive voices in the nation all of those years. Last year was Bernie Sanders, the year before was Jamie Raskin, so it's been quite an assortment of wonderful speakers. Tonight, John is invited and will moderate the conversation you're about to hear with one of America's leading young progressive voices, Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago. Mayor Johnson is 48 years old and was elected as mayor last year by building a multiracial and multiethnic campaign on top of his long and esteemed record as a union leader and activist in Chicago. To quote John's latest column interview with the mayor, Johnson is the first to acknowledge that the work can be daunting. He took charge of an great American city that for many years has been plagued by gun violence and budget shortfalls. But he's also committed to a long-term vision that applies new and innovative approaches to tackling old problems. With that, please give a warm Madison welcome to Mayor Brandon Johnson and John Nichols.
All right, the mayor of Chicago.
Yes.
All righty, right here.
First of all, that round of applause, I'm usually open to those type of receptions, but I kind of feel like I'm being teased by Packer fans. Right?
Oh, no.
It's like, Mayor Johnson is here. They don't have much to cheer for in their sports teams, but we love the mayor.
Well, you know, with all due respect, you've just it's showing, and this is something I know about you, which is you are willing to go to very dangerous places. And I will just tell you, even mentioning the Packer, it's a dangerous game, brother.
I know it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that is your nature. And it is one of the most interesting things about you. As we were backstage just coming on, Paul Phelan said he's 48 years old. Yeah. And the mayor said, wow, that happened fast. and pretty much everything with you has happened very fast of late. We should tell people up front. This is somebody who started as a teacher, worked for the Chicago Teachers Union, which is, I think, well understood as one of the most effective and dynamic militant unions in the United States. They have done some amazing stuff as a union. Got elected Cook County Commissioner when he was still looking like a very, very young man. And served there, and that's a pretty good gig in Chicago. It's not like being a county board member in Dane County. Not to say they're wrong with that. But Cook County Commissioner, that's a big deal. It's a big deal job. And then he had this crazy idea to run for mayor. And I think that's probably a good place to start when we're talking about how fast this is all happening. Because when you decided to run for mayor of the third largest city in the United States, do we accept that or do we still say second? I don't.
We're well, numerically in terms of population, third, but in terms of popularity, it's the greatest freaking city in the world, city of Chicago.
I wanted to let you go there and figure it out. So you decide to run for mayor of a city that is incredibly big, complex, and has plenty of problems, plenty of challenges to deal with, right? It's not an easy city to run. And if I'm not mistaken, when you started, was your poll position 2.3%?
Yeah, so my poll numbers will be, that number will fluctuate like my father's amount of coins that he had when he came up from Salis, Mississippi. You know how when you talk to older folks, they say, I got up to the north with 75 cents in my pocket, right?
Yep.
But no, the reality is that I was essentially unknown, John. I mean, with the work that I've done within, political organizing and education and, fighting for reforms of our police department and all of the other progressive ideas that we believe in. I was a Cook County commissioner. It is the second largest county in the entire country, one of the most substantial budgets in the entire country. Cook County is larger than many states, right? So this was a very serious, local political position. But with that all being said, when I decided to announce, check this out, you had the current mayor.
Yep.
You had a business leader who was worth millions of dollars who had ran before. You had a very popular congressperson. I mean, you had some heavy hitters, other alders.
Former head of the schools.
Exactly, who had worked under the Daley administration, right, who I ended up facing in the runoff. So you had significant and very sizable, formidable candidates. And then there's this middle school teacher who taught social studies, who was a Cook County commissioner, decided that I could run the city. And just for giggles, I take full responsibility for Governor Tim Walz running to be the vice president, because I opened up the lane for social studies teachers.
Exactly. There you go. There you go.
But even prior to that organizing, I mean, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge that, I grew up in a household of a working class, family. It was 10 of us with one bathroom. And I know, right? There's a few people clapping. He can negotiate good deals, can he? Right? Here's the thing. Whenever you're negotiating for bathroom rules in a house that large, you always have to ally with the women.
Without a doubt. And you're rather famous for doing that. So you've been very wise in that.
But my father was, a pastor, a public employee. He was also a carpenter. So you understand, when your father's a carpenter and he's a pastor, do you understand the kind of pressure that puts you in when your father is just like Jesus, right? So, but the service motto is what I've always been accustomed to. My parents were organizers. My father was one of the leaders in the NAACP chapter, and I watched that work where you show up for other people, you give of yourself. And that's what led me ultimately into public education, to invest in young people, for them to be able to discover their purpose and fulfill their ultimate, purpose in life. And of course, to protect our democracy. Public education, first of all, is a real legitimate human right. And so our fight for public education was really the element that further radicalized, my belief. It was a W.E.B. Du Bois that said that public education at the expense of the state, particularly in the South, after all, is a Negro idea. And so you saw these pressure points within major cities around America, where you had Democratic mayors who were acquiescing to the interests of corporations to privatize our public assets, and the good of the public is the antithesis to what makes rooms like this possible. And so it were efforts to make sure that public education became, a legitimate effort to pursue in terms of funding and ensuring that those who do the work are supported. And one thing led to another, organized with the Chicago Teachers Union. I just will say this in closing. What's fascinating about this trajectory, September 9th, there was a photo on social media. And September 9th was the anniversary of a number of folks who were fighting to keep a school open, a neighborhood school in the south side of Chicago. And there were a number of us who went on a hunger strike. Some stayed for 30 days. I joined the hunger strike about 30 days in. And there are pictures of me. Yeah, I didn't start day one. I was out there organizing, But there's a picture of me with now the president of the Chicago Teachers Union. We were locked arms, taking an arrest in front of the elevators in City Hall. And now those elevators are held for me as the mayor of the city of Chicago.
How many years before you became mayor was that arrest?
So that would have been 2013, I believe. So that's about a decade.
1 decade before you're mayor, you're getting arrested in City Hall. And, which, shouldn't that be a requirement? But you covered a lot of territory in there. You opened up a lot of things. Let us begin with one of the things that in our conversation, this is tended toward later in the conversation, but you are deeply influenced by your religious upbringing. You are the son of a pastor and an activist, somebody who brought these things together. And that's a big part of how you kind of look at the world, right? Especially, and it's a liberation theology.
That's absolutely right. And I just want to say this out loud, whether you subscribe to a religious position or religion as part of your ideology and your frame for politics, I will say this, that the greatest gift that you can ever provide to humankind is the gift of love. And that is really what I'm focused on, and I know that there is a particular party that believes that, Jesus is wrapped up in the GOP. And it's a very ridiculous assertion, right? Because the way, my father would talk about this quite a bit growing up, because there was 10 of us. He would always talk about how we know the price, but we don't know the value. And this was I thought it was just an excuse for him to not buy stuff for us, right? It was like,
because I grew up with that too.
Just say you don't have it, right? But then he would share the scripture of Jesus the Christ, that where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And so, my fundamental values that are tethered to Black liberation theology are centered around this theme of how it's love that covers the multitude of anything that's wrong in society. And so if we lead with that guiding principle, whether you are LGBTQ+, whether you are a new arrival, whether you're someone struggling in poverty, whether you're someone who wants to start a small business, whatever your orientation or whatever your disposition or whatever your challenges are, that my responsibility to people is to show up understanding their value. And when you value them, you invest in them. And that's the sole purpose of my candidacy and why I inevitably ran to become mayor of the city of Chicago, is because I want to show what full force progressivism looks like, and how do we do that in love, and how do we use that to bring people together. And it's really been the joy of my life. I will say this last part about just being connected and tethered to my faith. It was, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had this incredible, phenomenal speech before AFSCME. And just about a year before he was assassinated, 1967, this large convention. And my father, by the way, who was a member of AFSCME, where Dr. King said that if the labor rights movement and the civil rights movement were to ever collide, what enormous potential it would have. Now, I just want you all to know that I'm paraphrasing, so don't anyone get any all up in arms about works-cited. I hear universities get all big deal about works-cited and things like that.
You're on the edge of the university.
Okay, all right, good. But this is the sort of the catalyst, but it's also the framework in which that I'm governed by, that faith and labor, civil rights, and labor rights, Dr. King saw them as one of the same. And living that out in government is something that our ancestors dreamed of. And so again, as a social studies teacher, if nothing else, the lessons that we learned from those profound leaders and actors a generation ago, how do we fulfill the hopes and the aspirations of our ancestors who, for many reasons, which we probably will discuss, were not able to see them fully manifest?
And this is something you should know about the mayor. He's already given us Du Bois, King, and a decent amount of biblical quotation. And this is what he does constantly, which is, you are that social studies teacher raised up into the political sphere. So let me bring a biblical quotation for you. And again, I'm going to paraphrase, and that is that, we welcome the stranger. And we happen to be in a moment in our history in America right now where we're seeing a city, Springfield, Ohio, facing an incredible pressure from our political elites as regards immigration. And obviously this is an issue you've dealt with in Chicago a lot. And I think it is fair to say that some of our Republican friends have sought to make cities the target for much of their, I don't know a better word than venom, as regards immigrants. So talk to me a little bit. Talk about the moment we're in as regards this issue and how cities have become such a target and such a central focus for these discussions.
Well, I think it is important to name, as I searched for a word the last time we spoke because I wanted to make sure that I was articulating what the behavior that we've seen from Republicans is that it is one of the most absolute iniquitous forms of on display that I've seen. Because it's one thing if you are legitimately concerned about the security of our country, right? It's another thing when you use, this issue as a way to punish your political foes. And that's the part that I find to be ungodly and undemocratic. The governor of Texas used this as a way to attack cities. And to be more specific, he was sending them to cities that were not just run by Democrats, but he was very intentional about cities that were run by people of color. Because they wanted to use this issue, which we're seeing this now, as our vice president, fights to make history. They wanted to use this issue of immigration as a political attack against the Democratic Party, and more specifically, to drive a wedge between the Democratic Party and its base. And the base of the Democratic Party has overwhelmingly been Black voters. I mean, it's the largest single group of voters in any political party, right? Where the Democratic nominee for President of the United States of America can arguably bank anywhere from 80 to 92 to 94% of one group. I mean, you think about the type of organizing that is done to secure that type of voting block. But if you can create some doubt to get people to believe that they are losing and that somebody else is benefiting from their struggle, that has always been their purpose, and that is an act of evil. And the way the governor of Texas has attacked cities like Chicago and New York and Denver, it is wickedness. And with that being said, to your initial point, when I became mayor of the city of Chicago, there were new arrivals already in the city, many of whom who were sleeping on floors at police districts. So imagine going into your local precinct and there are 30, 40, 50 people, in some cases even more, laying on the floor in the middle of the police district, and in airports all along the streets. It was unmanaged, and buses continued to come. And what my guiding principle challenged me to do, and I welcomed this challenge, was the way Joseph behaved during his time of leadership. That if you have an opportunity to revisit that story, the Bible says that he took care of his siblings and he fed the world at the same time. This is America. You know, the city of Chicago was established by a Black Haitian immigrant who fell in love with a Potawatomi woman, and they set up a trade post at the bank of the river because they saw Chicago as this capital of the world. And here's the thing, their idea of what Chicago could be actually came to fruition. And it's through that lens, that love story of how, you know, Jean-Baptiste Pointe du Sable and Kitty Hawa saw Chicago as the place where the world could come together. And I think the final note is not only did Trump Republicans block the effort that President Joe Biden, as well as the bipartisan efforts of his leadership, where the Senate came to an agreement around immigration reform, which the last time that happened, I was in high school. Right? And the time before that, the Bears were the Super Bowl champions. So you understand? So do you understand? So I'm thinking, we passed immigration reform, we're going to go to the Super Bowl, people. But the point is that it didn't happen, and it was intentional. And we also have to name why, you know, Central and South America are experiencing the hardship. So when Chicago declared itself to be a sanctuary city, it did it under the first Black mayor ever elected, who was a congressperson who understood that Ronald Reagan and his war on communism disrupted and destabilized Central and South America, which led to this incredible arms race, the Iran-Contra, which at the time, the United States government was funding someone by the name of Osama bin Laden, right? And this so-called war against communism. And what it did was it destabilized Central and South America. It disrupted their economy, and it forced people to move out. And Harold Washington, 30 plus years ago, said, we will be sanctuary because we understand the complicit nature of foreign policy and how it disrupts local foreign states. And so now here we are, fast forward, you have people who are claiming that there's some mass conspiracy in Central and South America disrupting the oil supply in Venezuela and forcing their economy to adjust to these so-called sanctions, right? And so now the destabilization of this government has forced people to flee. And everyone is upset with new arrivals in Venezuelans until they go to Citgo and get their gas. Right? And so it's under that context where I understand where love absolutely has to prevail, that we have to do right by the people who are here, but we also can respond to the world, but we also can call out the contradictions and the hypocrisy that exists within the Republican Party because they don't want to solve things in this country. They want chaos. They can only lead when there's chaos.
So I think that this is one of the issues which relates back to how you got elected mayor. Because one of the things that you sought to do when you ran for mayor of Chicago, this great big challenging city, was to build a rainbow coalition. You're very familiar with the Jackson campaigns, and our friend Dave Marinas, who covered the Jackson campaign, is here. And you did seek to build this coalition that was multiracial, multi-ethnic, and to get people working together. When you became mayor, there were people trying to drive wedges almost immediately. And I'm interested in, as the mayor of a major city, how do you manage that? How do you, that it becomes not just a managerial role, but also a constant educational role, I would imagine.
It is. First of all, I'm not always afforded these type of forums to be able to really break down these issues and provide some context as well as some structure to the conversation, to have real substantive debates around what the pathway forward is. And, when I've studied coalitions and even being a part of a coalition, to be perfectly vulnerable and direct with everyone here today, that coalitions like ours are far more fragile than we ever want to admit. And when you look at, for instance, when you study the work of Bear Rustin and how hard he had to work just to make sure that that March on Washington happened. Because there were people who thought that Dr. King was capitulating too much to the administration. There were individuals that thought that the march would be too radical and it can cause upheaval in this country. And so you're constantly working to balance the interests of those who are part of justice, right? And that is a very similar dynamic. And part of it is, quite frankly, is that coalitions of progressives, if you think about it and really unpack it, how long and how often have progressives had the executive branch and legislative branches of government? It's very rare. And so our situation in Chicago, where as a progressive mayor and the most diverse city council in the history, and I have individuals who are allied with me, individuals who are almost allied with me, individuals who may not share my ideology, but they might have a view of the world around affordable housing that allows them to
You might find an issue that would bring them in.
Right, exactly. And so there has been a constant education. But what I can say is that we've been able to not only manage those expectations, we have been able to govern. I mean, despite the chaos that the state of Texas or the governor of Texas tried to ensue in the city of Chicago, we passed a pay time off ordinance where 1.1 million workers will receive 10 days of paid time off. It is the largest, most substantial paid time off ordinance anywhere in the country. Hold it. So the people of Chicago,
no. That's impossible. You can't have done that because our Congress can barely, can barely manage to even open a discussion on something like that. 1.4 million people, 10 days of paid time off.
Yes.
Public and private sector.
Yes.
And that wasn't the only thing you did. I just want to underline that because we see so much at the federal level, which we're told is impossible. And it is a lesson that in cities, often the things that we talk about at the national level that don't happen actually do happen in cities.
They do, and they can if people are sincere about transforming the lives of working people in this country. And so one of the things that we're also proud of is not just the paid time off ordinance, because by the way, the people of Chicago asked for a day off. I gave them 10. I'm just telling you, it's really not that hard to negotiate with me. But we abolished the sub-minimum wage. Tip workers will receive raises every single year in Chicago to match the minimum wage on top of their tips. We did that, and we're talking about 60,000 workers in Chicago, mostly brown and black women. And guess what, by the way? You know who else is now carrying that to abolish the sub-minimum wage? Vice President Kamala Harris. She's taken that effort nationally, right? And so the things we do in local cities have the ability to influence the federal government. And so we're very proud of that. This summer, we made a commitment to hire young people. The 2 summers that I've been in charge of Chicago, we've had a 32% increase in summer youth employment. This year, we hired almost 28,000 young people. That's a 32% increase since I've been in office. 6 weeks of paid time, not internships like the Generation X. You could fool us into working for free. This generation, you can't do that. And by the way, just for the Youth for Generation, I won by 26,532 votes. 27,000 new voters voted in April of 2023 that did not vote in February in round 1, all of them under the age of 34. Young people got me elected. Young people are leading. Young people are transforming this country. And that's why, as a party, we have to do everything in our power to not just challenge our young people, but help them find their purpose. Look, this generation... This generation they're unique. As I said, as a Gen Xer, and I think I'm relatively young.
Yeah, well, that's the thing to emphasize. You're not that far from them.
Not too far,
because
right?
At 48, in the scheme of mayors of Chicago, and frankly mayors of most cities, that's pretty young.
Except for when I wake up in the morning and I have to go work out, and then I don't feel like that. But as a Gen Xer, I always describe us as as the youthful energy to this moment, we are, first of all, the last obedient generation on the planet, by the way.
You're it.
I'm just saying, that's it.
Yeah.
Because the current generation, and I mean this with all sincerity, they want to get hired on Monday, they want to get paid on Friday, and then they need a mental health day on Monday. Which is fine. My father retired with 4,000 sick days, and he was proud of it. You know that generation, I don't take sick days, I'm gonna retire with all of them. Not this generation, but investing.
Maybe they're saner. Yeah.
Well, what I think what it also indicates, though, is that you have an electorate that is not only conscientious about the world around them, they're also a little bit more honest about their limitations. Now, it doesn't mean that you can always just simply, take a timeout every time things get tough. But what I can say is you have a generation that elected me, that gave me the impetus around paid time off, the sub-minimum wage, abolishing that. We reinstituted the Department of the Environment at the city of Chicago. It was taken away, we brought it back because we understand environmental justice is not just about saving our planet, it's also about building a new economy around blue and green energy. In fact, on the southeast side of Chicago, this is the unique social studies part about my role as mayor. So Chicago has always been a part of just history and how young people played a part of it. And so, Carnegie Steel, southeast side of Chicago, where skyscrapers were built across the globe, and it received its start in Chicago. When JP Morgan decided to invest in Tesla, electricity as we know it came to life
Not
at the
Tesla
Chicago.
with
Right.
Other Tesla,
Other
just to be
Tesla.
sure.
Be sure, right?
Yeah, right.
But electricity at the World Fair came to life. The worker person's car, the Model T, built on the southeast side of Chicago. And now we have this new form of technology that you all should do some more digging around, because I think it's going to revolutionize how we solve problems, but it's called quantum computing. And the first quantum computer is going to be built in America, will be built on the southeast side of Chicago where the steel mills existed. And so we're talking about 32 years of abandonment. We have brought billions of dollars of investment around building a new green, blue technology, and doing it through the experiences of young voters who are very aggressive about protecting this planet, but building an economy that is centered around their purpose. And so those are just some examples. I mean, I think the other thing that's important to us, that we're seeing this around America, homelessness.
Yeah.
And, I put forth a $1.25 billion investment for economic development, for small businesses, but also to build more affordable homes. And it's the largest investment for economic development and neighborhood development in the history of Chicago. And it is very much aligned with what Vice President Kamala Harris is pushing for, to build more entrepreneurs, to build more affordable homes. We're just simply saying, I'm not taking complete credit for her policy platform, but it's starting to look really coincidental.
Mind you. Well, she did come to your hometown to accept the nomination.
How about that?
Hey, but let me, before you, and I do want to talk a little about that, because I think that was it's quite a remarkable thing that you oversaw with the convention. But here's the tough part. I'm sensing your excitement about all this. You love talking about the things that you've accomplished in a year and a half, this very short amount of time. But you didn't exactly inherit an easy situation. If I'm not mistaken, the budget shortfall you're looking at right now is?
It's $1 billion for this year. It was $500 million in my first budget, of which I predicted that when I was running. I was the only candidate to put out a budget plan, which, by the way, if you have someone who's running for office and they come to you for advice and they ask you, as a candidate, should I release a budget plan? Most people will say, no, stay away from that.
Yeah, it didn't work well for Mondale.
Right? Yeah. So you start talking about budgets and taxes, and people start to blast you for your vision. Well, let me say it this way. As progressives, We have to be confident that we can actually run and win on our values, and we do not have to shrink away from the political forces that want us to believe that we are wrong. We get to tell people the truth about how we build better economies for working people. And so when I, expose the fact that we've had malfeasance when it comes to austere budgets, you had a decision that was made where the city of Chicago took the dedicated revenue for pensions and people's retirement and decided to take that revenue to give to corporate interests to develop downtown. And this happened in the 90s, where essentially the city of Chicago spent all of the money. They spent all of the money, and they didn't take care of the responsibilities for working people. And they made a decision when I was in high school, and now I have that bill. Because protecting people's retirement is fundamental to who we are as working people in this country. And the fact that you've had politicians who had a public school teacher who's going to retire after 34 years and is going to have a pension of $38,000 a year, that somehow that person is the problem with our economy. And so, yes, we inherited this mess. In the 90s, when I was in high school, there were 900 people being murdered in the city of Chicago annually. And so between not responding to the financial reality that was in front of them, not responding to community safety in a real way, not investing in our public assets, where public housing was destroyed, public schools were closed, pensions were raided, the neighborhoods were left to fend for themselves, people were starving, unemployment went up. You've had all of these hardships, and then you had administrations that begin to move tighter budgets with austere budgets, where fines and fees and the little bit of tax dollars that we had, we gave them to private entities and began to privatize all of our assets. In Chicago, we sold the parking meters. We sold the Skyway. They sold off the city to the interests of corporate. And then a brother gets in office for 15 months and they're talking about, well, have you done yet? I'm like, you know what I'm saying? And so of course you do. And so, yes, we inherited a mess. And that's why our effort of what full force progressivism looks like, where we can take the model of the civil rights movement, modernize it, and then begin to move an agenda that speaks to everyday working people. I think maybe one of the best ways to describe being mayor of Chicago right now, anybody in here, is anyone fixated on HGTV like me? Okay, at least I have a few people in here, right? So one of my favorite shows is Property Brothers.
Oh, there you go. Of course.
And it's like a Property Brothers episode. There's the house that you really want. But here's the house that you can afford, but we can make that house look like the one that you really want. But the challenge is, once you look at the house that you can afford and you want it to look like the house that you really want, you start to take down a wall, and then you find out that there are termites, right? But unlike Property Brothers, you can't cut to a commercial, right? And so you've had toxicity in this city, in this home, for a very long time. And so now, as we revitalize and modernize, but we make sure that the structure stays in place, because there are some good bones. We do have a public transportation system in the city of Chicago that has incredible potential to grow. We do have strong public schools in our city that, if with the right investment, every single child will have access to what many students do have access to in the city, but it's not distributed equitably. We can actually build affordable homes. In the first 15 months in office, we've put roughly, I'm going to round down, 1,300 affordable homes. 1,700 are already near completion. We actually took old office space downtown that will not return to business. We've converted them into homes, of which 30% of them will be affordable. Name me somewhere in the world where we say downtown and affordability. The city of Chicago.
So this is sounding good, but this is sounding good. However, you got to do this all this vision of making this house look like the one you want to buy in a relatively short amount of time.
Yeah.
And I read the papers in Chicago.
Now, why would you do that?
Well, you know, I'm passing through. Well, I'm a journalist, and I have respect for many of the people that work for them. But I will tell you, it's on a daily basis we find a report about something that's tough or something that is challenging, and you are facing, I think, the challenge of many mayors around the country, where you are in a position that's difficult. There is not enough money to do everything you want to do, and you've got to make it through that and get to that place where the house looks like it's supposed to look. And that can take a real toll on your approval numbers. That can be politically challenging, and your allies can move away from you or, you know, demand more. How are you going to negotiate that in this relatively narrow window?
Yeah. Look, it is tough. I mean, there's no question. Serving in political office, and particularly as mayor of the city of Chicago, it's a tough position. In fact, it is well documented that the mayor of Chicago is the most protested political position anywhere in the country outside the president of the United States of America.
The most protested in the country.
Right?
And in fact, just to interrupt you, you actually told me one time when we were talking that it was foggy one day, and you had a dozen calls from people asking you to get rid of the fog.
Yes, no, literally. It's true. And you know the worst part about it? 6 of them are my relatives, right? For real. Because every single problem in the city of Chicago is the mayor's fault. Yeah. It's like if you're at a red light too long, it's like, come on, Johnson, change the light, right? That's just the reality. But you know, the way governance has happened in Chicago, there's been a reliance on the mayor of the city, and we're working to shift that a little bit, because I've said this, and I still stand by this, is that the 5th floor has to become, that's the floor that the mayor's office is on, has to find its way closer to the people. More people have access to the 5th floor ever in probably the history of Chicago.
Under your mayoral team,
Under
more
my
people
mayoral
can get
team,
in
right?
that door.
Because there are individuals who have always had access, which they still do. But those individuals who have always had access, the line is longer for them. And they're not used to having to wait, right? Because, you know, labor has real room at the table. Community-based organizations, faith leaders, small business leaders, right? All these individuals have access. And when you have that many people or that many interests that you're juggling with incredible expectations, which I don't shy away from, it does become a pressure cooker. In fact, you know, there was one particular day I was talking to my oldest son. He's 16, by the way, and driving up here, I'm like, this is only a 3-hour drive. This may not be a bad look for him, but he's preparing for college and thinking about it. And, you know, he is going through some dynamics in high school as a soccer player, and he's a leader on the field, and he's kind of struggling through that process. And, you know, we were sharing just our experience for the day. And he knew I had kind of had a rough one. He had, you know, a rough one. And I said something to him, to your point about the challenges. And I said to my son, Owen, I said, my worst day on the job as mayor will still be better than your grandfather's best day. And it doesn't matter how hard it gets, that there are people who fought hard for our interests to finally not just be a demand, but something that we can execute. And sometimes even people who are allied with you get nervous along the way. You know, Harriet Tubman says she could have freed more of us. She could have, right? And what I am confident in is that this railroad that is no longer underground, that we don't have to hide from who we are, that we can live and lead with our values, that even as difficult as they become, and even when the corporate media is out to prove that somehow the way that they screwed up is the only way to go, and that progressives can't govern, you know what they can't take away from me? They can't take away the 10 days that workers have. They can't take away the raises that we just passed out. They can't take away the affordable homes that we're building. They can't take those away. And as long as we're doing what I said, that my father said that we always have to do, is that we lead with love, that my love for people is greater than any op-ed that is oppositional to my value system.
I know the thing that breaks your heart is the violence in Chicago. And Chicago gets talked about a lot as a city where there's a lot of killings, a lot of guns. You and I have talked about this, and your vision for how to deal with it is a distinct vision. It is not simplistic, but I think people here should hear some of your thoughts about how to break this cycle of violence in Chicago, because that is a fundamental challenge that Chicago has.
It is tough. Yeah. It is top of mind every single day. You know, if there was one area of this job that has shifted me, it's this area. And what I mean by that shift, not my value system, but every single morning I receive a report of what happened the night before.
Sure.
So I get all of the names of individuals who are shot, all of the individuals who lose their life because of senseless gun violence. I live on the west side of Chicago. It's a beautiful part of the city. The neighborhood is called Austin. At one point, it still is today, the largest concentration of black families in one neighborhood. At one point, Austin had as many as 100,000 people living in just this one city. It was the city inside the city, but because of poor management and disinvestment, we are closer to 80,000 families now. Beautiful homes, great parks. We have all the major arteries that come through the city of Chicago. Chicago Avenue, Madison, the blue line, the green line is near us. We have a highway that can get you downtown in 15 minutes. You can get out into the suburbs in under 15 minutes, the far west suburbs. It's a beautiful community, but it is one of the most violent neighborhoods in Chicago, and we've experienced this firsthand as a family. You know, we've literally had bullets shot through our home. One in particular, my children's bedroom. It pains me every day because the people who are losing their lives to senseless gun violence, the vast majority of them are young black men and boys. And so I've purposed to transform how we do community safety, that we can respond to the immediate crisis, but we also have to really take a look at root causes of violence in our country.
Let's slow you down for a second there and say, because we hear that a lot, right?
Yep.
We say, oh yeah, we gotta look at the root causes. But when you talk about it, you're talking about root causes and economics, right?
That's right.
Yes.
That's right, no, absolutely. In fact, you know, President Johnson understood that and began to move in that direction. And our country battled, is it a war on poverty or is it a war on drugs? And so the country decided to go with Nixon's plan around the war on drugs, and we know what that got us. It led to mass incarceration, and it didn't make any of our neighborhoods safer. In fact, when President Johnson was pushing to really focus our attention on poverty, it was the governor of Alabama, Governor Wallace, who said that President Johnson believes that the reason why there's violence in cities is because a little kid did not have enough watermelon to eat. So these very provocative, racist presentations that we're seeing even carry out today. And I think about this every day. And there are 3 or 4 things that we're doing. First of all, we are concentrating in the city where violence is most pervasive. There are about 35 beats that are most violent beats in Chicago. 56 if you expand some of
these are police beats.
These are
particular
police
beats.
Right, where the vast majority of violence happens in those beats. So we have a people and place-based approach. In those beats, what else is happening there? These are the same beats where schools were closed, mental health clinics were shut down, all of this disinvestment. So we're showing up with the full force of government, offering mental health services. In fact, we just reopened, since Mayor Harold Washington, every single administration has shut down mental health clinics. Well, we reopened a mental health clinic on the far south side of Chicago and expanded behavioral health services on the west and lower west side of Chicago, because making sure we are investing in people's mental health, that is one of my top priorities. And thank you. And so our approach has been holistic. Yes, Policing has a role. But policing alone is not going to solve our problems. In fact, 40% of 911 calls are mental health crises.
40%.
40% of them. And so what I've done is we've expanded our public health department, creating an alternative to 911. So when there's a mental health crisis, a mental health provider shows up to that crisis. And that's what we're doing. We're expanding those workers. But we're also making sure that we have detectives that can solve crimes, right? And so I said by the end of my first term, we would have 200 more detectives. Well, we're going to have 200 detectives by the end of this year. So halfway through, we'll have the number of detectives that we need to make sure that we are, engaging in constitutional policing. But we also are, investing in helicopters, right? But we're also moving away from these gimmicks of technology like ShotSpotter that have proven not to work. And so whether it's investing in mental health, public health, right? That includes mental health support services for crises, making sure that we're building affordable homes, that we're also investing in education while working to solve violence in Chicago. We've already seen the benefit of that type of holistic approach. Since I've been in office, we've had double-digit reductions in homicides in 2023, and we're seeing that in 2024. There's a reduction in shootings. In every violent category, the numbers are trending down.
We don't have a lot of time left.
Okay.
We got the former Speaker of the House, third in line to succession of the presidency coming along. And I know, I understand in Chicago that still doesn't rival the mayor, but there's two last things I want to touch base with you on here. One is and you touched on this a little bit, talking about foreign policy under Mayor Harold Washington. You recognize Chicago as a city, to your view, that ought to not merely lead on domestic policy, not merely lead on things, and all the things you've been talking about here, but also on foreign policy. And you cast the deciding vote in the city of Chicago to support a ceasefire in Gaza. But that was controversial. You had a divided city council.
Yeah.
And when we've spoken about this, you have said that to your view, in the Harold Washington tradition, it's important that cities take stands on fundamental big issues.
Absolutely. It was cities that took a stance on the apartheid state in South Africa. When you think about the global consciousness of that particular generation.
Excuse me, I'm going to ask, sir, could you take your seat? Sorry. I'll let you get in there and comfortable. Thank you so much. Yes, sorry.
No, it's okay. I mean, I may be mayor of Chicago, but we know who's in charge here. Good grief. Hey, got two questions, sir. You know how hard it would be for me to tell one of my elders to sit down?
I love everybody in this room so much. I want to make sure they all hear you.
Well, look, I will say that the global consciousness of leaders from a generation ago was quite superior, quite frankly. And I mean that not in a polarizing aspect, but more in terms of just the level of thinking and understanding that when Mayor Harold Washington was elected, people saw him as their mayor if they didn't have someone like him. That we saw our hopes and aspirations connected to cities. I think about George Leland, the late George Leland. There's a school that's named after him on the west side of Chicago. It's the same seat that Sheila Jackson Lee sat in. And Sheila Jackson Lee, the congresswoman, her son is my senior advisor. It's also, it seems like quite prophetic or divine of just that interconnection and understanding what our role and responsibility is as Americans to the rest of the globe. And with the global population shift that we're seeing around the world, that it's incumbent upon cities to understand their responsibility, because the European Union just figured out their new arrivals or migrant mission as a region. And so whether it's global population shift and climate change or even wars, and what Netanyahu is doing is absolutely, it is criminal, quite frankly. And with that, what I want to make sure that we lift up, that the attack on innocent people by Hamas, the city of Chicago was one of the first cities to pass a resolution to condemn that act. And we're very proud of that. I mean, we were part of an effort to lead that, and there's one Jewish American on the council, and we stood in solidarity with her, and we continue to stand in solidarity with people who have been subject to terrorism. And with that vote, we led in the city of Chicago, the first major city, to call for the immediate release of hostages and an immediate end to bombs. That as global residents, it is our fundamental right and responsibility to call for peace, not just in this country, but across the globe. Because whether a child is dying in Gaza or on the west side of Chicago, violence is violence, and we should condemn all acts of it. And I don't apologize for that.
Circle around to your recent moment in the spotlight. Chicago hosted the Democratic National Convention.
Yes.
Which some folks think went rather well, and going to that convention, there was an awful lot of talk. Democrats, I think, had this thing, 1968-itis, right, where they thought, oh my gosh, we're going to Chicago for a convention. We've got a vice president replacing a sitting president. Everybody looking at their history books and thinking, oh my gosh, this could be really tough. You went out of your way to make sure that Chicago could have a successful convention and have protests, right? That it could all happen in the same place. And you, I remember talking to you before the convention, you believed that it would happen. You promised me that it would work out. And it essentially did. How did you know that?
Wow. Let me just say, of all the things that I get to take credit for the DNC, I just want you to know that I'm also responsible for the weather that happened in Chicago, DNC.
Yeah,
look, if I have to build anti-fog machines, I get to take credit for the city of Chicago feeling like San Diego.
Yeah, it was very
for 5
mild.
days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, look, here's the thing. I promised a safe and a vibrant convention. And that's what we delivered, because I have confidence in the leadership that I put in position. And here's the thing. Some people are intimidated by protest. I'm not. Because if it were not for protests, I would not be mayor of Chicago. And in fact, absent protest, we wouldn't be in a position where this country can make history by electing the first black woman of Asian descent to become the most powerful leader in the country, and arguably in the world, right? And so we didn't get here because dates changed. We got here because we changed the hearts of people. And that's what I wanted to be on display. And here, some of these individuals who were part of these protests, calling for, a shift in our foreign policy. Many of them I've stood alongside of. And here's the thing, they wanted their message to get out because it was important for that to happen. So we could not afford to have disruptors. So we had organizers, friends of mine, who were part of that infrastructure on the ground to make sure that people could protest peacefully. Doesn't it feel good, though, that the city of Chicago not only had a great convention, but we protected the constitutional right to protest? That is fundamental to our democracy.
And when I was in your office, or not in your office, but nearby it, I said to you, and we were in about a minute to go, you were rushing off to another meeting, I was doing something else, and I said, well, if you had to write the platform of the Democratic Party, what would you do? And you were standing up already to leave, and you leaned over into the microphone or the phone or whatever, and in a minute, you wrote a platform. And do you recall what you talked about? It was a civil rights.
Yeah.
And tell me, we're going to close off with your platform for the Democratic Party.
Yeah, for the Democratic Party, it's important that in this moment that we embrace a substantial platform that speaks to the demands and interests of everyday working people. This multicultural, intergenerational movement that propelled a middle child of 10, who, by the way, for the first time since Richard J. Daley, I'm the first mayor not to be tied to the Daley operation. It's true. The first. And I say that because the platform for the Democratic Party has to be people, focused, and centered. Even individuals who have not quite embraced that our platform is going to help them even if they don't vote for us. What's fundamental to everyday people, my purpose, finding my purpose, being able to work to live out your excellence through your God-given gifts. Where can I lay my head? Where can I send my child to school? How do I get around? What access do I have to healthcare? And how do we ensure that our environment works and it works for future generations? That the American people are with us when it comes to everything that we care about as Democrats, but more specifically as progressives. Our work is to help alleviate some of the tension and fear that exists in our society, that somehow winning has to come at the expense of someone losing. The platform has to be clear that there's more than enough for everyone. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
Ladies and gentlemen, the mayor of Chicago, Illinois, Brandon Johnson. Good to be with you, man.
Thank you. Oh, wow, look at this, look at this.